honestly, I did not write that. All right. I guess that obligates me to say something smart and do a really hot demo. I'm probably going to do neither. But we can talk a little bit about the drawing process, and we can maybe talk around that with the demonstration as well. I often think that people have different ideas about the drawing process, and I certainly have mine. Mine is that I believe that regardless of what direction you go with your skills, that there is a core skill that really needs to be understood, without which the plateaus don't go very high. Many people that enter this process, regardless of how much personal experience they've had, are excited and want to get on with it and get right to the art form. They want to start playing the game. And there are obviously a lot of styles and techniques that appeal to us. And there is a temptation on our part to jump to style and technique. And when you jump to style and technique, you've got all the flash and flair in your drawing, but oftentimes no real substance. So I find if you want to go with percentages, that a great many people go that way first. Well, that's what excites us. We hear the party, we know that it's something that we resonate with, and we move towards that. And so we engage on that level, and only later learn that it's very thin without a substantial understanding of the drawing process. And so I get people coming to me often after they've attended a few of those parties and realize that there's more to the game, and they're ready to roll their sleeves up and start down to business. I've even had lots of students who have graduated with bachelor's degrees in art, and you name the degree, that haven't really had substantial training along the way. So for me, the most important thing is to get to the hub experience of training, and that means learning your drawing skills. We'll talk a little bit about what that means to me in a moment. But that often, that quest by everyone that's entering on that level is often diffused in their attempt to arrive at something substantial by all the habits that they formed up to that time. So training is almost like retraining. We've all had some training, and often as not, that much of that training has to be undone. Even if in that training and in those studies it's provided you with a lot of pleasure and a lot of recognition, they often are cul-de-sacs. They only go so far, they plateau so far, only so far up, and you can't get any higher from those directions. Style and technique do that. If we enter from the point of view even of something as innocuous as this, I like simplicity, so I want to draw with simplicity. So I like elegant lines, I like the way the thing looks on the surface, and so on. Well, finally, even simplicity has to be undone. It has to be reevaluated. And what I tell people that like simplicity is that in order to arrive at simple, notice I said arrive at simple. In order to arrive at simple, you first have to be complex. So complexity means maybe a lot of drawings that don't look so hot. A lot of drawings that don't look so hot means that I need to be willing to do the work regardless of its appeal to others. So suddenly I'm moving away from an appealing drawing into something that might actually educate me in the drawing process. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm kind of cutting out. What we've done is we've kind of taken the layers off and come back to how to begin. And beginning really means a lot of attempts that might not produce the results you've been getting with those techniques and styles, right? So there's this temptation to slip back into it because it's more comforting and I get more responses. So in a way, it's a kind of courageous thing to keep pulling back from that and working more and more on the bedrock skills. And that's essentially what I attempt to do in my classes. Also, I think it's important to understand that it doesn't matter what level one is at. I get people in my classes, as I was saying, that say, is this a pencil? Do I need this thing? It's an eraser, right? Sitting next to people, right next to people that are professionals and have worked in the industry a long time. I have public classes. A lot of people from Disney and DreamWorks and so on come to those public classes as well as take the classes that I give in the studio system. So it's a nice mix-up. We all learn from one another. And here's the interesting thing, is those people that are professionals have been working in patterns for such a long time. They've forgotten what they like because they've been producing the sounds of what's necessary within the orchestration of the project that they're working on. Whole studios have ways of drawing. And what you become is a kind of have gun will travel if you've got skills, and you kind of mold your skills towards whatever the studio is asking for. If you're with a studio long enough, you can't tell the difference between your own interests and your own development from those that the studio would like to see you produce for them. So oftentimes as not, I get a lot of people that are coming back to reopen that question, right? And those people will then come to the public classes. And therefore, those people might actually even learn something from someone that's only been drawing for 3 weeks because they forgot that or they overlooked that or something. You follow what I'm saying about that? That way, the education moves all across the board. So what happens is that I'm breaking the system down in such a way that it makes it interesting for everybody. And those people that have heard certain phrases or things need to be really careful to listen well. Because when you hear something that someone says, for instance, I might say a phrase, I might use the word gesture. If you automatically know what gesture is, you stop listening. We have to learn to open that up. Well, what do we mean by gesture? What do you mean? The word is so used. It's like the word love. When someone says love, what the hell do they mean? Because there's so many different ways to look at it. When we have familiar words like that, if there's a case where we need to study, such as the case I'm talking about, and I use the word gesture, you have to see what automatically comes up, put it aside, and listen to what we want to do with it. So that means our understanding can grow within the language. Our language can actually grow that way. Am I good so far? Are we still following each other here? Good. Okay. So therefore, you've got people that have been working a long time that are willing to re-examine the very language that they use and that we use. And as a result, someone brand new can work with someone that's been working a long time. And there's a real exchange from one to the other. Something I might say to somebody new, I get somebody that's been working 10 years saying, oh yeah, I forgot that point. Or I've never heard it quite like that before. So there is a tendency for us to miss things. And there is also a tendency for us to protect what we know. The way we protect what we know is by not letting anyone challenge what we know. And I guess what I'm saying is that the best way to grow is to challenge what you know yourselves, right, at all times. It's really important to use your skills in a professional environment. You give them what you've got, but when you're self-training, or when you come back to training, at the same time, then you click that switch off and click this one on. You're back to being open. When they buy you to be, you know, the master of something, you produce your mastery. But then at the same time, you need to open that up for more growth. So there's this constant movement back and forth. It's time to perform, it's time to learn. Time to perform, it's time to learn. And that's what I'm encouraging most of my students to do at that time. It's what I myself try to do. So anything I say is up for grabs. Anything I say is simply a way of putting things so that we can communicate. It doesn't mean they're right, but what it does is it allows us a bridge for conversation. And so what I thought I might do is just talk about some things that might be important for all of us, regardless of what stage. So what I'll show you are things that I talk about. I'm not going to do a polished drawing here. I'll just kind of talk through something, a little bit like I might do in a classroom. And it doesn't matter, I could do this in a first night class with new students, of course a mix, or I might do this you know, after 10 years of teaching at DreamWorks with people that have come off a project and they're ready to re-examine, re-look, reopen the question. All right? Before I start that, are there any questions? Is anybody confused about anything that I might have said so far? I don't know if that's a good sign. Yeah, you have one. All right.
Actually, I was wondering, what is one of the biggest differences you find changing from going from TV animation to feature animation when you were
as what?
Storyboard artist?
For a storyboard artist. The biggest thing is, and by the way, I teach storyboard. The biggest, and I teach, what I've decided to do is to teach storyboard, teaching storyboard the TV way rather than the feature way. And there's a strong reason for that. When you're in feature, you're royalty. And when you're in television, you're just scrapping around. But this is the problem with feature, is that you're given certain assignments to do, working with 2 or 3 maybe characters, and you're constantly in conversation with others that are working on the project. Constant conversation, directors and so on. Right? So you're sharing and writing and so on. When you're in television, there's no budget for that. You don't have 3 years to develop a project. You've got to produce it in 6 weeks. All right? You have to be the director, the cinematographer, the artist, the writer, and every other thing that comes along, because there's no time for anything else. And you have to do it in 6 weeks. Maybe you have to produce it in even less time than that, maybe 3 weeks or 2. And then you clean it up if it's approved. But you don't see the director every day. You can't go to the director every 5 minutes. That's why I like to teach it that way, because you as a storyboard artist wear all hats, and therefore you get a much bigger picture of how to produce a story, a complete story. You're having to operate everything. You get a big sense. You become, in a certain sense, the composer and also the orchestrator, right? And you're operating. So every once in a while, the real director comes in. But the more you handle that, the more he or she likes it. Does that make sense? All right. But the skills, they have to be there no matter what. You're just producing them on the clock, so to speak, when you're working in television. So I want it to be hard for my storyboard artists. And I give assignments that are, if you can handle the assignments I give, you can be a story, and you handle them and you solve them, you can be a storyboard artist. No problem. Any other questions? Hi. You arrived, okay. Any other questions before we just kind of try something? All right, why don't we do it? Let's see. I think I'm going to stick to something that everyone can see. And like I said, I'm not going to do fancy drawings. We're just going to kind of talk through things, all right? So let's just take a figure. Let's take a figure, the way we might develop a figure. I usually have people think of the figure, and I'm thinking this way, and I've been teaching this way since '91. So it's been a long time, and I haven't changed my mind about it. I've refined it a lot over the last years. But this is really important. What I find when people draw is they don't draw everything. So they never understand about balance. They never understand about completing a thought. So a line is only completed when you complete that line. And so I say to people that your gesture, your opening gesture, should basically include all 8 parts of the body. Upper, lower. Do you hear that? Okay. Upper, lower, head, neck, 4 parts, 2 arms and 2 legs. That those 8 parts should be in every drawing, and the question should be, when you see your subject, and it doesn't matter if your subject is on a stand in front of you or if they are something that pops up in your imagination. Draw all 8 parts, but first with the question, what is my subject doing? So what is my subject doing is the first thing that comes. Then you use the 8 parts to tell what the story is. Let's take something simple. You'll notice I'll just kind of do a broad stroke like that. It's kind of a start stroke. And let's see, we'll do this, cross and down. So now I've got a cross line. Notice I didn't do what they ordinarily call the long line of action. I didn't do that. Is anyone familiar with that term? Right. I don't do that because it forces the issue too much, and you try to force too many things into that. What I'm looking for is relative long lines of action that work together. So, and notice that they aren't really next to one another. They jump across. Right? So really what it does is it has me thinking across the form. It's kind of like a double helix in a way. It needs spacers. Well, that's the width of your figure, all right? Now, our subject might be, say, like this, and let's just do there. So I'm coming quickly to this, and let's do this, let's drop the head here, and let's raise this and do that. So, now, I've got my 8 parts of the body, all right? Upper, lower, head, neck, arms, and leg, all right? The gesture, if I wasn't talking, would have taken me how long? 20 seconds maybe, right? See, so I didn't get what they say lost in detail. And that's what most of us do. Something starts to appeal to us and we get caught over here and we want to get that, or we get lost and involved in something along the edge. These lines that I drew, they're not the edges of the form, and they're also not the axis of the form. They're simply an expression, including the balance of the figure. Does that make sense so far? So, they don't represent anything that the eye actually sees. It represents the spirit of the thing. And that's what I'm drawing. I'm sort of shooting from the gut. In the same way that you might step out of the dance floor to music that you don't know, to a dance you don't understand, and you just say, I'm going for it, and you start finding it. In that way, I'm saying, go into this, find it, feel it. It's from the gut, what I said is, it's not from here. It's not this. It's not cerebral. We're moving right away into the feeling of the form. So, if I can find my gesture, and I like it, then I can move on from this point. Now, I might say, no, really, I think I really want that leg here. That kicks out a little bit more. This is the time to make that change in your drawing. This is the time, not later when you've done a lot of detail work and so on. Most people don't look at their work until it's too late. The legs are too long, the head is too big, something is off. This is the time to look at it and decide if your relative proportion is working. I say relative proportion because that's part of the opening gambit. When you have arrived at that opening gambit, you look at it and you say yes to it. When you say yes, that means that you're going to support that with everything else you do in your drawing. Every bit of development, right? So it isn't, oh, but I like this thing and I like that thing, like so many films. When they're made by committees, you got a whole bunch of good things, and it feels like a whole bunch of pieces stuck together. There's no real flow. There's no this supports that. There's no sub-themes. It's all noise. They actually make films like that today, and they still make a lot of money, because apparently noisy films get box office. There's a difference between, noisy films and really good films, and sometimes we know the difference. What I'm asking you to do is to know the difference in your own drawings. What's just noise? Even if it's nice noise. Does it work? Do these things work together? Does what I do now, let's make this, well, we can make it the front. Okay, we'll make it the front. So I'm kind of coming around, and notice now I'm kind of conceptualizing. I'm moving from that gut feeling into a more cerebral mode, and I'm saying, well, this has got a volume to it, maybe something like that. This has got a volume. I'm going around the belt line, pulling down. My pubic bone, where I put it is, the belt line is right about here, and I'm cutting down to where the pubic bone is, and that pubic bone, that's approximately, for me, half the distance. That doesn't mean that everybody is that. It's just a kind of a general idea, general model. So if our person's legs are longer, because I have that idea, I will note that what I'm looking at is different than what I come with. So when I come with something like this idea, I'm actually coming with a kind of way to take measure. In other words, I'm not insisting that my subject be what I come with, but I use it to measure what they are. That's what gives me somebody specific characteristics. So if my specific subject has longer legs, I'll know it right away, right? Whether it's here or whatever. Does that make sense? Right, so coming with an idea helps you see the difference between what you're observing and what you might be doing currently to what you're using as a measurement. Okay. So the other way is I could say, well, this leg is a direction. Notice these lines are also directional. Did you notice that? In other words, this is doing that, this is doing that, this is tucking over here, right here, tuck. This, therefore, is stretching. So notice I'm going all over the place before I get involved in detail. And by the way, I would be doing this very, very light. Or I might even be doing it in my head. If I work in ink, I might say, well, I want the final product to be on the paper, but all this thinking to be internalized. When you do that, your drawings start to look like magic. It's how did he or she get there? Okay, but there are these steps. And for instance, this direction is helping to support this whole movement. Therefore, if I don't put the feet on the ground and I don't finish the hand, the energy just goes out like the end of a fire hose. But when you do this, you're basically saying, and it stops there, stops there, stops there, stops there. And you begin to look at your drawing and you find real balances and things like that. If you always avoid that, you're never dealing with the laws of physics. Figures always end up floating or something. You follow what I'm saying? So now, that's that aspect of it. I don't know whether you noticed, but I've got the subject leaning slightly forward. Did you notice that? This leg, I might think of as coming toward us. Now notice I drew that as a cylinder, not a shape, because shape does not give me that dimension. So I'm valuing not just shape. I'm not devaluing shape, but I'm giving I'm giving volume a chance. So I'm giving volume a chance. So I say, this continues it in this direction, okay? So what did I do? I've got a gesture, and now I'm using conceptual forms. When I use conceptual forms, it allows me to three-dimensionalize, to think conceptually. So suddenly, I'm not just drawing what I see, I'm looking and deciding something about what I see. I'm thinking about it, I'm conceptualizing. Therefore, I'm not just copying like a copy machine, right? I'm thinking about it. That means I'm interactive and I'm making choices about what I'm drawing. I'm not simply drawing a flat screen. That's one of my objections about reducing everything that I see to a flat piece of paper, because it doesn't allow you to think around, it doesn't allow you to feel the spine or think inside. So if I do that, this hip is thrown out like this. So this leg might support, well, what are we going to do? We'll do this. All right? We've got that. This arm might go back like that. Therefore, the elbow might be back a little more because it's foreshortened, right? This one's coming up. So I start to get this conceptual idea. Now, if you don't do the gesture first, this figure will look very mechanical. So I'm suggesting that you do the gesture and make sure that it's very free. That's why it's got to be decided the same way you decide what the dance is, not with the head. Because the head wants A, B's, and C's, and 1, 2's, and 3's. But that dance thing, it actually is allowed to be more supple, alive, energetic. It is the spirit of the pose you're looking for here. And the spirit of the pose has 8 parts with relative proportion, and they are telling a story, right? When I get that, I move to this part, conceptual, and then in order to give it more life, I'm saying, what's missing? What's missing? What's missing? Oh, I don't know anything about the human body. Bones, muscles, what's going on? So notice that all of these forms are basically geometric, like that, right? Well, the human form isn't like that. But there's a tendency on our part to reduce everything to repetitions of everything else. So what I want to do is to move into this more lyrical thing that we started with. Remember the gesture in the beginning? So I'm seeing this muscle of the quadricep pulls down. Maybe I looked and I found out, wow, there's this muscle pulling down this way. It's the longest muscle in the body. It's got a funny name, and I don't need to know it. And the patella is over here, dimensionally. And I see this is straight and this is pulled. So I'm thinking across the form, how this is to this. But I'm also thinking around the form, so that I make sure that I don't put anything in this cylinder that will disprove it. What will disprove that will destroy my drawing. If I'm thinking all the time about what helps prove the volumes, and I'm using anatomy to help me be articulate about that, then I can go about. But if I do anything like this, if I see something like this, I can choose not to do it. Things like this kind of throw us off. We don't know how to understand this surface with those marks. So why put them in? Do things that help prove what you're trying to say. But if you do anything and you can justify it by saying that you actually saw it, and you justify it, that doesn't make a better drawing by you justifying it. If you do this, you're dead in the water. Do you see what that does to that form? Kills it. So you don't want any lines like that in your drawing. You're looking for the things that help you feel around the form, to feel the spine, even though we're doing this. And I might come up here now and I say, well, shoulders don't really look like that. We've got a rib cage. I learned that we have a rib cage. There are all these ribs, but it's actually a cage, and it looks kind of like an egg with the pointed side up. I'll drop that neck down into that. Sternum, center line, down to the pubic bone. Sternum. So then where do the arms go? Well, the arms belong, and the shoulder girdle itself belongs to part of the arm system. So this clavicle, arm at rest or up, doesn't go very far. A little bit it lifts. It goes up, and it's independent of this. Notice I can move my arm, and my rib cage doesn't go with, right? That means the whole shoulder girdle, in other words, this portion can go up in this direction while this one stays over here, and yet this doesn't move. So we're actually examining those 8 parts and breaking them down into different subdivisions now. And we also realize that as we're doing this, we're starting to understand the mechanics of drawing. That it's not just copying, it's about understanding how the mechanism works. So we've got pectorals that come across this way, male, female, and they all end up out here to the outside of the arm, and under it is the deltoid. Let's say I've learned that much, and I look and I conceptualize those and put that together. Therefore, if they go out here, when my arm reaches up, what happens to those pecs? They pull up and under the deltoid, which is going back here. Now this arm, cylindrically, coming slightly toward us like that. Also, when this comes up, the scapula back here is part of that system. So it pulls out, and we'll start to see it pull out away from this. See a little bit of this? Okay. So we've got in here, on the inside, along that belt line, you've got these 2 points. Okay. We're cutting down. This is the inguinal ligament on both sides. We're pulling from here down to here, the navel. Here, 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 all 3 equal, and this is pulling up. Now what I want you to see is if I just throw these 3 bones in up here, do this is round, this is square, do that. Pull back down, maybe round this slightly because this is a bicep coming in here. This is pulling down. Pull off here, take these muscles that are on the inside and show that stretch. Notice that everything I draw helps tell the action. So I'm not just drawing a figure that's taking a pose. I'm drawing, each note helps tell what I want to say. Do you follow what I'm saying about that? So I'm therefore not drawing what I see, I'm drawing what the subject is doing, not what the subject looks like. That doesn't mean that it can't look like the subject, because that's about relative proportion too. But my question was, in the very beginning, you remember, what is the subject doing? So I'm arriving at this through this process of gesture, doing conceptual forms, and then adding into it the anatomy as I learn along the way. But the interesting thing and the important thing about anatomy is that when people learn it, they don't know what to do with it. And what you have to do with it is to give it a visual language. Because to understand that there is a deltoid and that there is a rib cage doesn't mean that you understand how to use it to make a drawing. I'll give you a really good example. If you've got a drawing of a rib cage and a body on a t-shirt, right, it looks flat. And if you do that same thing to a drawing on a piece of paper, it looks flat. So what you need to say is what does a deltoid do? Well, it's kind of like a half a cone. It's open because it attaches in back, it attaches along the side, and it attaches in front, along the clavicle, along the acromion process, and along the spine of the scapula. So I know that about it. And it pulls down and attaches halfway down the arm. It's pulling from here. The neckline, what we call the neckline or the shoulder line here, which is really the trapezius, is kind of at rest here. It's not so, but here there's a little pressure. And so it's involved in this lift. I can pull this down, tricep pulling it this way. So you kind of get the idea. And notice that it doesn't just end there. Now it pulls down here and goes all the way down to where the foot is. In other words, the whole thing is in action. So this is something that I think is important, and a lot of people that have been drawing a long time that are drawing just surfaces, and they feel that there's something missing, but they don't know what it is. I'm asking them, when they come to my classes and have this question, I basically say that you're going to have to give a couple of things up. One is you're going to have to stop using style and technique to cover up the fact that you can't draw something. Because every time one comes to a place that they don't know, they do a little tweak on it, or they do somebody else's shorthand and pass it by. So there's like a little self-lie that goes on there, you know. So the beginning is to admit to yourself that you're kind of shutting your eyes to the mistakes you're making and refusing to see them. So the beginning really is the ability to open your eyes towards what you're really doing. And it's only really then that one becomes willing to make changes. When one sees what one is really doing, then we can make changes. And this system I'm working with is something essentially that anybody can work with. So I think that's going to be about it. I just give you kind of a sense of what's interesting to me and how I present things to people that come my way. Do you have any questions? Let me get you. You said something about balancing on the foot, yeah, and that it's underneath the head?
Yeah, the one that's supporting.
Well, if I'm doing this.
Yeah.
But what if I'm doing this?
Yeah, exactly. That's what
well, if you're one of those people that believe that business about if you drop a plumb line down from the pit of the neck, that doesn't really work. Really, because we're shifting all the time. And really, in order to understand that dynamic, you have to be able to not just draw what you see, but you have to be empathetic with your subject. In other words, if you can't feel what they're feeling, if you get on the dance floor and your dance partner knows more than you do, you become empathetic and you start doing the moves they do in order to get in the groove, so to speak. That's empathy, but it's sensation empathy. In other words, you're still feeling, but it's the sensation end of the range, whereas the emotion is on the other end. Because you can have empathy emotionally, that's feeling, or you can have empathy sensation, that's feeling. So I'm talking about you need to be able to feel what they feel sensationally. When you do that, then you can get inside your drawing. So now you're drawing side to side, what this is to this. You're also drawing volumetrically, and you're also drawing the inside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and that's what I sort of
Right. But you got to get your feet. A lot of people that sit in the back, they say, well, I didn't see the feet. So I put them in grass, or I didn't draw them, or whatever. I didn't see the hands, right? Well, you got to draw them anyway. I mean, even if they end up looking like bacon strips, they should be there. Because the more you do it, the more your figure won't look like it's floating away and will look like it's making contact. You'll be dealing directly with the challenges that are in front of you instead of putting them off till another time. You don't want to put them off. There aren't enough lifetimes to deal with all that. You got to handle it all now. You got to take your hits. And even the professionals, the ones that have been doing this 20, 30 years, they're willing to, the ones that are really good are willing to take their hits. Right? And they've stopped trying to end game and reach a plateau and be wonderful. They realize that it's part of the process, and that there's sometimes you're in the trough and sometimes you're at the top of the wave. And then you begin to love the whole process, whether you're in the bottom or not. You don't leave the room pouting and go to Vegas for the weekend if you didn't do a drawing right. Okay? In other words, you stay and you sweat through it because you know this is part of the process. You don't scribble it out and write, "I suck," next to it, right? Because in essence, and why are you writing that? You write that because you know people will come by, and you know that they'll look at your drawing and they'll go, "Oh, that sucks." So you make sure that they know that you know that it sucks. But what happens is that they know that you know that they know that you know that it sucks. Right? So what you need to do is take your hit and not write "it sucks," and keep working on a piece of crap, because it's not dead yet. It doesn't mean you're going to bring it to life. Once in a while you can bring it to life. But when you keep working with it, it means that you become invincible in the process. Instead of you can get knocked out of the game every time a little thing goes wrong, right? We're so delicate, us artists. Yeah?
I don't know too much about your history, I apologize, but it sounds to me, because I've been taught by painters and figurative people as if you're mapping what's up and down, and use either as a sculptor, but you talk as if you're drawing as a sculptor.
Yes.
Are you a sculptor?
No, I'm not a sculptor. But I will tell you this, some of these ideas were invented by Michelangelo, who was a sculptor who believed that drawing and painting was a false art. And then he was forced to do it by the Pope. So he reinvented it. So he invented sculptural drawing. And I am an advocate of that, and belong to a long line of people that go back to the Florentine school. And Michelangelo is the Florentine I'm talking about, right? So it is sculptural drawing. It doesn't rely on just reproducing the surface of what I see. There's a whole energetic system that we can address here, right? Right. Yes, you know, left to right and top to bottom is relevant. But there's also around and there's also through the form, right? Yeah.
When you're working on a drawing and you keep working on it and not quite coming out, is it better to just refocus and start over?
There's a time when you should start over. I think 95% of the time you should stay with the drawing and suffer it. Because if you don't, then the next time you keep reproducing it up to that point, up to that point, up to that point. You kind of have to go through it and say, I'm here because I brought myself here. So suck it in, and you produce this, I'm responsible for it, work with it. Then the next time, you might say, okay, be careful. But if you don't, and you constantly think you can do it better right from the get-go, I find that most people don't do it better. That they keep coming up to that point, but they're not willing to go through it. So if I were to just give you general advice, not specifically, maybe this is a reason why I would say no, start over. I would say go through it, suffer through it, sweat it out. You're going to end up with a crappy drawing? Tough, you started it that way. Do it. Live with it. Own it. Because if you own it, you'll stop needing to be perfect all the time. And then you'll start to find a strength in these drawings. They might not be gorgeous, but there'll be a strength in your drawings. And eventually they'll begin to have an actual aesthetic that's not borrowed by using someone else's style or technique, but because it's yours. You know, it comes from you. Because of you sticking it out. Right? You can't fancy it up with someone else's lipstick. Okay? Anything else? Yes?
So earlier you emphasized that you want to focus on what the artist, what the model is doing. What happens if there's a situation where you just don't know what they're doing? Like, one time I was sitting in figure drawing classes and we got a 50-year-old yoga instructor and she's just started doing these acrobatic moves that we were just looking at as like,
Man, you're telling the story. She's telling her story. What's your story? It's your story. She's doing it or he's doing it. It's perfect. You don't know every aspect of it. What's the story you see and tell? Right? What's the one you want to tell us as a storyteller? So you've got someone that's making a suggestion, and you need to allow it to touch you, to hit your muse, or they are your muse, or whatever. And so you need to ferret it out and make it yours. It's like going and painting the forest. The forest is fine. It doesn't need you to reproduce it. And when you do reproduce it, there's something not alive about it. But if you're interacting, you smell the air and the weather changes and you swallow a fly and that all becomes part of what you're bringing to the table. And in the end, you've involved yourself in the process of creation instead of trying to copy nature's creation. You are naturing now, right? In other words, you're doing the dance with the forest. If you're not doing that, then you're simply an archivist, okay? And I try to remind people that you can be more than just a Xerox machine, reproduce a perfect thing. Why not take a photograph? Why not tell me something? Your work, I want your work to show me something new. Bring me something that I don't know. Let me have an experience. I don't care if it's the umpteenth version of an apple. I have actually looked at drawing a painting of fruit and seen it for the first time. I mean, it can still be done to this day because someone had the vision to see it differently than anything's been done before, and I got to have that experience. I mean, what do we want from our artists, right? If not that, show me something. Don't just repeat the same old. I mean, corporations do that. Corporations are making our movies now. So we get reboots, and we get sequels and prequels, right? Where's the original idea, right? So they know they can make money on that because they made money on it before until it peters out. So they're just basically using us. I won't say it. Ooh. You know what I mean? And then throwing us away when they're done. All right? All right. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a real heck of a time with the face and the head. I love drawing the figure, but then I
Yeah.
get to the head, I just either make it ridiculous, like I just can't get the way I want it. I kind of want to hint at something, but then I just put in too much detail and stuff.
Where'd you say you live?
West side. Los Angeles.
West side of Los Angeles. Well, every other term at the Animation Guild, I do a head, hands, and feet class. Notice I said head, hands, and feet. I didn't say portrait, hands, and feet. Because most people can't draw a head. They can't draw it from perspectives. So it's really important that you understand that, because if I'm drawing you and you shift like this, then I look up again, now I draw the eyes. And you do this, and now I'm drawing the nose. So I started here, one eye's here, nose is there. And I'm not aware that those little changes have happened. And so when it all is done, maybe it looks like you, but it looks like, you know, the Stepford wife version of you or something. There's something not quite right about it. So what we want is to understand how to get our coordinates right with the head and have some substantial ideas to start with. And they all have to do with symmetries. Now the truth is when you get right down to it, none of our faces are symmetrical. But if you can do a symmetrical head, just like I was saying about this model, about this being the halfway point, bring that to the table, ideas, general ideas. Bring general ideas about the head, get them in the right position. Now I want it to be you. So now I can make those adjustments and stuff. Okay.
There's a lot between portrait, people teaching portrait stuff,
Right.
and then like the actual head. And
Yeah.
figure.
I don't think that anybody should be learning portrait till they understand how to draw a head. It's just me. I don't know. There's a lot of good portrait people out there. But I would never teach it without making sure that someone could draw a head first. And that's just a generic head. That means I want you to be able to draw a head this way, this way, this way, that way, this way. And then we'll talk about the who. First is, can you get those coordinates right and keep it in relative right proportion and understand it with the neck and the upper shoulders. Then we can talk about portrait. Now I know that with the people that do portrait don't usually start that way, because many people, and I started with portrait when I was young. I was doing portraits of everybody in town before I was out of high school. So by the time I was done with high school and then my first couple of years of college back in Detroit, I could draw heads. I was good, but I couldn't draw anything from the chin down. So I had to give that up completely. The only way I was going to learn was to give up the head completely. By the way, when I draw, you didn't see me start with the head, right? I don't start with the head. What did I start with? What? I started with the big forms, the big expression first, and then the big parts, right? And the head is an appendage. Now, I'm not saying one never should start with the head, but the head is often the last thought, not the first thought. In other words, my whole body is trying to express something to you. And finally, I'm refining it up here. And if I didn't get that right, I'll do a little twist with my hand, you know. Right? So this is the end of the game, not the beginning of the game. And often when people start with the head, I've seen this 1,000 times. This is no exaggeration. When they're done with the head, you know, They kind of sigh some relief. Might as well go out and have a cigarette because you've just climaxed. And the second team comes in and does the rest of the drawing. And it looks like two people did these drawings. Two different teams, right? It's because they lose interest once they've got what they want. If you draw this way, you're developing the story as it's moving and as it goes. I'm not saying one never should start with a head. I'm just saying, as a rule, look at the way the energy moves, right?
It's so funny because like you see people teaching figure drawing, and when they get to the head part, it turns into a portrait.
Exactly.
It's like it's very frustrating.
Yes.
Well, that doesn't really translate to
It doesn't look anything like the rest of it, right? It doesn't have any freedom. It locks all up and becomes a series of techniques that were probably learned from someone else who got it from someone else and from someone, instead of really understanding the volumes and the shapes and how they fit together, the structure and stuff like that. Instead, we default to a series of things we learned. So our drawings are full of shorthand, style, and technique. We got to erase that in order to start and get down to business. And I swear to you, even the best people go right to the bedrock, right back to the bedrock all the time. You can see it in a lot of these artists' work. I was showing something at the WonderCon panel of Glenn Keen's, where he broke Tarzan down into a series of anatomical considerations. He's doing that the whole time. Okay, what do you think? We done?
What do you like better, drawing or teaching?
To me, they're kind of synonymous, because what I have to do is I have to keep, in order to keep honest, I have to I have to be able to do what I say. If I can't do what I say, I've got no right saying it. So I will not say a thing unless I can produce it. So that keeps me pushing me, and I have to match the questions. And like I was saying, I was encouraging heckling, right? Because unless you're challenged, if everybody's just going to revere the study, then I've got no challenge, right? So I don't mind if people don't understand and question, whether there's logic to what I'm saying. I invite that, because what it does is it allows us to undo it and think about it, maybe even in a better way. Because the truth is ideas are just ideas. I said this a little earlier. The concepts are simply a vehicle for us to understand one another. Concepts are not truth. They're simply a device. They're a bridge. Once that bridge is made, we don't need that. So I don't need to go around saying what a great concept I have, right? There might be a better one in another condition. So I use the concept for what it's worth, put it away. In other words, I need to stay open and be willing to rethink what's necessary in the next moment. Might be a different concept. As long as English works, I'll use it. If it doesn't work, I might have to learn another language. Right? I can't insist on my English because I know it makes sense when it doesn't communicate. Right? Did I say too much?
No.
Okay. All right. How are we doing? Oh, Gail. You're not gonna mess me up now, are you, Gail?
Probably.
All right.
So you hold your marker different than people normally write with a pencil, okay? You hold your marker
I hold my marker differently than.
than people normally write.
Yes, I was doing this, right? I wasn't doing this.
Yes,
I wasn't. Yeah, because this is all real small. What it does is it draws people in to the detail, and they're missing the big picture. So if you do this, you have to get back. So even though you're doing a detail, you're relating it to the big picture. Right? That's why easels were better for that. But now everyone's sitting at benches, and they bring those boards right up, and they sit there like this. And we even see some people down there like this, but they're drawing a figure this big, so they have to look like this. You can't get a sense of the whole if you don't have the whole in view, because you're always seeing the whole in parts. And it's very tempting to get lost in a detail because they're like little cakes. Each one has a nice taste to it, and you like to go there. But you have to realize that it's a full story. It's a full orchestration, is what I was saying earlier. You can be an instrument, but if you fall in love with what you're doing, you may lose the sense of how you need to participate with 109 other players. And that's what it means to get the right gesture in the very beginning, and to stick to it. Anything else? Oh, there she is. I knew it was going to come. I knew it. Okay.
I've been trying to do more visual work, but I keep feeling disconnected from my art when I do it. And I don't know if it's because I'm forced to hold the pen. Like, you can't really hold like a cap or pen.
No. No, you can't.
Do you have any suggestion?
I think you just doomed. It's the whole generation is doomed. No. You know, when I was storyboarding, back to the storyboarding, and you're working in these little tiny panels, I didn't work like this. It's from the shoulder. To get down there and do, you know, the Lost Boys and all the pirates in the treetops fighting with one another, down there like this, right, in a small panel. And it has to look spacious.
But I mean, like, now we have tablets that are like giant.
Right. All I'm saying in essence, Ashley, is that don't lose sight of the big picture, regardless of how you decide to work. You can work with your elbow, but it doesn't really matter. What you want to make sure is that when you go in to do the eye, make sure it relates to the head, neck, and shoulder. Or it might be a great eye in the wrong place. And I can't tell you, in the painting class, how often I deal with that. People that paint really well, but they lose sight of the big picture. You know what I mean? Because you're in there. Right. Okay. Any other questions? So you're done with me? Okay. All right, why don't we end it there?